Tonight, we step into a different kind of archive. Not dusty boxes locked away in a government vault, but something far more public. Stories printed in black and white for anyone to read. These are encounters described by ordinary people, reported in newspapers across decades, long before the word UFO became a household term. Stories that were published then forgotten until now. So settle in, because on the quiet edges of our towns and cities, long before the internet existed to spread rumors, something strange was already touching the lives of unsuspecting witnesses. It was the winter of 1967, December 12th. The air was biting cold, the kind that makes the world feel empty. My son and I were driving home along Route 34, just outside Ithaca. It was about 7 in the evening, dark already, except for the thin sliver of the moon glinting off the road. I remember the radio playing softly, something easy, familiar. My boy had fallen half asleep in the back seat, his head bobbing with every bump in the road. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just a car behind me. A red light, maybe the state police. I'd been going a little faster than I should have, so I eased my foot off the gas, ready to pull over. But the light didn't behave like a car's headlights. It didn't dip when the road curved. It didn't blink or sway. It followed me. I felt my throat tighten. The red glow grew brighter, filling the mirrors. Too large, too intense. Then it rose. Not forward, not down the road, up. That's when I realized this was no car. Hovering above the highway, maybe 50 or 60 feet up, was a disc-shaped object, smooth, metallic, glowing like a furnace. It was as large as a boxcar, silent except for a low hum that seemed to come from inside my own head. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My hands felt like stone on the steering wheel. Then the strangest thing happened. The car began to slow down, though my foot was still on the gas. It was as if invisible hands had taken over, guiding the vehicle gently, deliberately. I remember shouting to my son, or at least trying to, but the words never made it out. It was like my voice was trapped somewhere between my mind and my mouth. The car drifted to the side of the road, then suddenly jerked, as though something had picked it up. I swear I felt the weight shift, like gravity itself had turned sideways. A beam of light, spinning, almost liquid, poured down from beneath the craft, surrounding us. And then, without any sense of motion, the world tilted. We weren't on the road anymore. The car slid into a ditch, softly, as though we'd landed on a cushion of air. Everything went silent. Then I heard them. Voices. Not male, not female, just voices. Mechanical. Broken. Like a machine trying to speak human words. It reminded me of a bad translation tape. Jerky, cold, emotionless. One of them said something about my son. He will be fine, it said. He will only remember the car stopping, then starting again. I felt a chill run through me, but a strange calm came too. My fear melted into numbness, as if I had been wrapped in some kind of fog. Then the voice changed and said something that still makes my blood run cold. It told me that a friend of mine, a close friend, had died in a car accident that very evening. At that moment, I had no way of knowing, but the next day I found out it was true. The car engine sputtered back to life. The red glow faded, retreating into the clouds until the sky was just dark again. My son stirred in the back seat and asked if we were home yet, as if nothing had happened. I just nodded and drove on, hands trembling on the wheel. The road was quiet the way it always was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there with us. Sometimes, even now, when I drive alone at night, I catch a glimmer in the rearview mirror, a red light far behind me, and I wonder who was really in the driver's seat that night. They said he'd only remember the car stopping, and you know what? He never did recall a thing. But me, I remember everything. It was a quiet Saturday evening in rural Maine. Deputy Sheriff Harold Hendsbee and his wife Helen, a town selectman, had spent the day visiting friends in Farmington and were heading home to Madison, a familiar, peaceful drive along Route 43. As they crested a low hill near the small town of Starks, something unusual caught their attention. A bright light hanging motionless in the air above the hill ahead of them. At first, Harold thought it might be a plane coming in low, or maybe a helicopter. But as they drew closer, it didn't move. Not up, not down, not sideways. It simply hovered there, bathing the entire hillside in a strange, steady glow. Helen turned to her husband and said softly, "It's just sitting there, not moving at all." Harold slowed the car to a stop. The light was about as high as a telephone pole, close enough to make out that there was something there, though neither of them could see a distinct shape. It was as if the light itself was the object. After a moment, Harold decided to drive forward, but as soon as he eased onto the gas, the light shifted. It moved toward them. He hit the brakes, startled, and the light stopped too, hanging there again, silent, suspended in the air. He backed the car up about 30 yards, waited, tried again. Each time he moved toward that hill, the light advanced, flooding the windshield so intensely that he couldn't see the road at all. It was bright enough, he would later say, that I couldn't see a thing in front of me. Helen gripped his arm. "It doesn't want us to go up there," she whispered. That uneasy feeling settled over both of them, a sense that whatever it was warning them away. After nearly 20 minutes of this silent standoff, Harold finally gave up and turned the car around, taking the long route home along Route 148. Later that night, they realized they weren't the only ones who had seen it. Earlier in the evening, as they were first driving toward Farmington, they had noticed the same light hovering over the same hill. And when they passed a parked car on the roadside, 3 men and a woman stood outside, looking up. Harold stopped to ask if they needed help, and one of the men called out, "Don't go over that hill. There's a UFO up there. If you do, you're going to see something you won't want to see." The group quickly got back into their car and sped off. Harold remembered how terrified they looked. When the story made local headlines a few days later, Sheriff William Wright vouched for Harold's integrity, saying, "He's a very honest man, doesn't drink. You have to believe him and what he saw." There had been other sightings in the area that month, strange lights, unexplained movements in the night sky. Enough that even the sheriff admitted it's no longer a laughing matter. There's been too many of them. The Air Force, by that point, said it was no longer in the business of tracking UFOs, so whatever happened on that lonely stretch of Route 43 was left to the witnesses and to the unanswered questions that followed. Harold and Helen never tried to make a spectacle of what they saw. They described it the same way every time, calm, consistent, and quietly unsettled by what they had experienced. A bright, hovering light that seemed to think for itself, a warning to turn back, and an encounter that ended not with proof, but with mystery. For the Hendsbees, it was a night they'd never forget, a moment when the road home became a line they weren't meant to cross. It was the kind of morning you don't notice until something happens to make it strange. Jackie, my daughter, and her boyfriend Terry and I were leaving Fargo in the dark, heading west on I-94 toward Bismarck. I'd been up late studying. I was going to take a state real estate sales exam that day and felt tired but determined. The highway was mostly empty. We passed the Buffalo overpass and the world felt ordinary, the way it always does at that hour. Radio off, windows half fogged, 3 people on a long stretch of road, and that private, sleepy kind of conversation you get when you're not quite fully awake. Then the sky lit up. First, there was a sound like a big truck passing very close, but higher and more like a rumble that came from everywhere. The sky became bright, not a single light, but a cluster, and they were moving low over a field about 200 feet off the highway. My first thought was headlights. Then something in me told me those weren't normal lights. They hung there, luminous balls, as many as 8 or 10, and they felt too near, too clear. Terry said later that they looked bigger than our car. I remember the feeling in my chest, my heart thudding, like when a thunderstorm is close and you realize you're standing directly under it. After that, time began to snap like broken glass. I don't remember the next bit the way you might remember a trip to the store. I remember images, flashes, the feeling of being lifted, the sensation of my body not quite obeying gravity. The next thing I knew, I was in the back seat. Jackie, who had been sitting behind me, was suddenly where I had been sitting. Terry was there too, confused, and none of us could explain how we'd moved. We had what people now call missing time. What should have been a few minutes stretched into something like an hour, and that hour was a blank in our ordinary memory. Later, under hypnosis, I learned that the blank had a shape to it, a shape that changed the rest of my life. When I went under hypnosis, more came back in a way waking memory couldn't give me. I did not remember being carried aboard a craft as if someone had physically lifted me, but the hypnosis returned clear impressions of an interior and visitors. The beings I saw, or the image of them that came back, were not like the men in the movies. They were wrapped or bandaged like mummies. Their eyes were prominent, staring, and their arms looked almost mechanical, like metal rods joined together, like something you'd see on a toy construction set. They moved deliberately. They seemed to be examining me. I remember the touch of the instruments. One of the sensations I cannot forget is a cold, clear probe along the inside of my nostril, a scratch, precise and clinical. I remember thinking in that hazy, half-awakened zone that I was undergoing some kind of examination. It was clinical, a mixture of curiosity and procedure. The beings themselves seemed to know things, not by talking out loud, but by some kind of mental transmission. I could somehow tell they were aware of me and that they were exploring, taking notes, learning. Whether they were gentle or indifferent, I can't fully explain. It wasn't malicious in the way a mugging is malicious, but it wasn't an embrace either. It felt like an anthropologist studying a specimen. When I came back into the car, I felt awed, disorientated in a way that lasted days. Jackie said later she was unable to move except for her head at one point. Terry remembered a sense of detachment. None of us had any clear wounds, no dramatic marks that would satisfy a skeptical eye, and yet the top of my head felt funny for a while. A pressure, a low-level nausea that didn't go away until after I underwent hypnosis a couple of months later. We also noticed small things at home that seemed to have changed. The dog we had with us was gone when we returned and never came back. Jackie told me lights in the house had gone off on their own later that week. A bulb that burned out and then worked fine later. Little, odd things that didn't amount to proof, but that made the ordinary world feel slippery. After the sighting, the story spread. A couple of friends who knew what I had been through told a local man who reported on UFOs, and word moved through the small channels that handled strange things. Before long, I was getting calls, sometimes at the worst hours, and people asked me to come on radio shows. A television station wanted to talk to me. I was on the edge of becoming the kind of person you either pity or stop believing. The woman who says she was taken. I wanted answers that would fit in a neat box, but there weren't any neat boxes. Dr. Leo Sprinkle, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Wyoming, who had investigated other missing time reports, worked with me. He listened and he hypnotized me. He said he believed I was sincere about my experience and that the pattern, the lost time, the disorientation, the kind of images I recovered under hypnosis fit other abduction reports he'd studied. He didn't prove anything scientific in the courtroom sense. He offered a professional opinion that what I had experienced was consistent with the abduction pattern he'd seen. That was something, because I needed someone with training to take me seriously without laughing. That credibility, even if imperfect, brought more attention. J. Allen Hynek and other researchers were names people mentioned in hushed, respectful ways. Some in the scientific community were curious, others were skeptical to the point of dismissal. There were no photos of tiny implants or metallic shards in our bodies. There were no glowing footprints on the highway. There was, instead, the testimony of 3 people whose lives were a little different the morning they left Fargo and the morning they got back. I don't pretend to know why it happened to us. People who have studied abduction reports offer theories, everything from psychological phenomena to non-human intelligence doing experiments to parapsychological explanations about how consciousness and reality interact. Some researchers point to cultural templates. Once certain details become part of the abduction narrative, nasal probes, missing time, they turn up again because that's the language people use to make sense of unusual experiences. I've read those skeptical takes, and I listen to them. I do not discount them out of hand. I would like nothing more than to have a neat scientific explanation that fits inside a lab report, but I don't have one. What I do have are the sensations and the aftermath, the way my stomach turned for weeks, the way my mind came back to that field again and again in small, involuntary flashes, the calls I still receive sometimes from people who say they've had something similar or who ask me to describe the scene again because they can't imagine what it is like. The way the dog's absence left a hole in our home that no argument about evidence will ever fully explain to me. There were practical things too. Jackie was a student in high school at the time. She carried on as best she could. I was divorced with 2 other young children at home, John and Jenny, and the world required me to be a parent and worker even while part of me kept replaying that field on I-94. People were curious and they were unkind in equal measure. Some reporters pressed for the sensational, others asked careful questions. The Highway Patrol and National Weather Service were notified, but there wasn't an official record that satisfied those who want strict proof. If you ask me now whether I think those beings were from another planet, from another dimension, or from some corner of the human mind, I'll tell you the honest thing. I don't know. What I know is this. An experience happened to my family on that night in August. It rearranged our ordinary life for a while. It left me with memories that dissolve into images when I try to hold them like a coin, and it left me with more questions than answers. For anyone listening who wants to think about the experience from a distance, with white lab coats or with a heart full of wonder, I will say this. Whatever it was, it mattered to us. It changed how we looked at the sky. It made small things feel precarious and made the question, are we alone, stop being an academic puzzle and become something that could, in a single hour, reach down and touch you. I'm not asking you to take my word as evidence in a court of science. I'm asking you to consider the human side of a strange event. The disorientation, the effort to keep a family together, the way people try to explain what defies explanation. If you've never felt something like that, maybe it's hard to imagine. If you have, then maybe you'll understand why the memory, even now, comes back like a soft, persistent ache. I still sometimes look up at the sky on dark mornings and hold my breath, just in case. I still believe, with the simple stubbornness of someone who's been made small and then returned, that there are things in the world we don't yet know how to account for. And I still wake up some mornings feeling grateful that Jackie and I came back with each other, even if we returned carrying a piece of a question we may never answer. In the late autumn of 1896, a quiet wave of mystery swept across California. Newspapers up and down the coast began reporting strange lights in the sky, an airship they called it, decades before the Wright brothers ever left the ground. But among the scattered sightings and wild speculation, one account stood out. Colonel H.G. Shaw, a respected editor and civic organizer from Stockton, claimed that he and a companion encountered 3 extraordinary beings on a rural road near Lodi. What they described would later sound eerily familiar to us today. Tall, slender entities, a craft hovering in the air, and a sense of something not of this world. Tonight, we're going to hear Colonel Shaw's story exactly as it was published in the Stockton Evening Mail on November 27, 1896, more than a century ago. This is not a retelling or dramatization. These are his words, taken directly from the original newspaper account. So settle in and listen closely. This is one of the earliest recorded encounters of its kind, long before the word UFO was ever coined. This is the story of 3 strange visitors. Were it not for the fact that I was not alone when I witnessed the strange sight, I would never have mentioned it at all. Wednesday afternoon, I went out to Lodi in Lockford in company with Camille Spooner, a young man recently arrived from Nevada. I went to the places mentioned in quest of material to form an exhibit to represent this county at the Fresno Citrus Fair. We left Lodi on the return trip, I should judge, shortly before 6 o'clock, and we were jogging along quietly when the horse stopped suddenly and gave a snort of terror. Looking up, we beheld 3 strange beings. They resembled human beings in some respects, but still were not like anything I had ever seen. They were nearly or quite 7 feet high and very slender. We were both somewhat startled, as you may readily imagine, and the first impulse was to drive on. The horse, however, refused to budge, and when we saw that we were being regarded more with an air of curiosity than anything else, we concluded to get out and investigate. I walked up to where the strange-looking persons were and addressed them. I asked where they were from. They seemed not to understand me, but began, warbling, expresses it better than talking. Their remarks, if such you could call them, were addressed to each other, and sounded like a monotonous chant, inclined to be guttural. I saw it was no use to attempt a conversation, so I satisfied myself with watching and examining them. They seemed to take great interest in ourselves, the horse and buggy, and scrutinized everything very carefully. While they were thus engaged, I was enabled to inspect them as well. As I have already stated, they were 7 feet in height and very slender. I noticed further that their hands were quite small and delicate, and that their fingers were without nails. Their feet, however, were nearly twice as long as those of an ordinary man, though they were narrow, and the toes were also long and slender. I noticed, too, that they were able to use their feet and toes much the same as a monkey. In fact, they appeared to have much better use of their feet than their hands. I presently discovered that this was probably a provision of nature. As one of them came close to me, I reached out to touch him, and placing my hand under his elbow, pressed gently upward, and lo and behold, I lifted him from the ground with scarcely an effort. I should judge that the specific gravity of the creature was less than an ounce. It was then that I observed him try to grasp the earth with his toes to prevent my lifting him. You can readily understand that their slight weight made such a provision necessary, or they might be blown away. They were without any sort of clothing, but were covered with a natural growth hard to describe. It was not hair, neither was it like feathers, but it was as soft as silk to the touch, and their skin was like velvet. Their faces and heads were without hair. The ears were very small, and the nose had the appearance of polished ivory, while the eyes were large and lustrous. The mouth, however, was small, and it seemed to me that they were without teeth. That and other things led me to believe that they neither ate nor drank, and that life was sustained by some sort of gas. Each of them had swung under the left arm a bag which was attached to a nozzle, and every little while one or the other would place the nozzle in his mouth, at which time I heard a sound as of escaping gas. It was much the same sound as is produced by a person blowing up a football. From the description I give, I do not want you to get the idea that these creatures were hideous. In appearance, they were markedly the contrary. They were possessed of a strange and indescribable beauty. I can express myself in no other way. They were graceful to a degree, and more divinely beautiful than anything I ever beheld. The strangest part of this story is yet to come. It is the lights they carried. Each held in his hand something about the size of a hen's egg. Upon holding them up and partly opening the hand, these substances emitted the most remarkable, intense, and penetrating light one can imagine. Notwithstanding its intensity, It had no unpleasant effect upon our eyes, and we found we could gaze directly at it. It seemed to me to be some sort of luminous mineral, though they had complete control of it. Finally, they became tired of examining us and the horse and buggy, and then one of them, at a signal from one who appeared to be the leader, attempted to lift me, probably with the intention of carrying me away. Although I made not the slightest resistance, he could not move me, and finally, the three of them tried it without the slightest success. They appeared to have no muscular power outside of being able to move their own limbs. Well, after trying in vain to move either of us, they turned in the direction of the Woodbridge Canal, near which we were, and as they flashed their lights toward the bridge, we beheld a fine sight. There, resting in the air about 20 feet above the water, was an immense airship. It was 150 feet in length at least, though probably not over 20 feet in diameter at the widest part. It was pointed at both ends, and outside of a large rudder, there was no visible machinery. The three walked rapidly toward the ship, not as you or I walk, but with a swaying motion. We followed them as rapidly as possible and reached the bridge as they were about to embark. With a little spring, they rose to the machine, opened a door in the side, and disappeared within. I do not know of what the affair was built, but before it started, I struck it with a rock and it gave no sound. It went through the air very rapidly and expanded and contracted with a muscular motion and was soon out of sight. I have a theory, which of course is only a theory, that those we beheld were inhabitants of Mars, who have been sent to Earth for the purpose of securing one of its inhabitants. I feel safe in asserting that the stories being told by certain San Francisco attorneys are clumsy fakes and should not be given credence by anyone. That was the testimony of Colonel H.G. Shaw, published in 1896, describing what he believed could have been visitors from another world, possibly even from Mars. Whether you believe his account or not, it stands as one of the most remarkable early descriptions of beings and technology that sounds strikingly similar to modern-day alien encounters. What makes this story powerful is its sincerity. Shaw never sought fame or fortune. In fact, he was reluctant to tell the story at all, fearing ridicule. Over 100 years later, we're still asking the same questions. What did he really see that night on the road to Lodi? Were they human, visitors from another planet, or something else entirely? Whatever the truth, this forgotten piece of 19th century news reminds us that humanity's encounters with the unknown didn't begin in the modern UFO era. They go back much, much further. If you enjoyed this exploration into documented encounters from history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps more people discover these stories of the strange and unexplained. And so, the articles fade back into their archives, uneventful headlines on the surface, but beneath them, a world of unanswered questions. These were real reports written by real journalists, trying to make sense of extraordinary claims. Whether these encounters were misunderstood events or something genuinely out of this world remains up to each of us to decide. Until next time, keep your eyes open. The truth doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it's printed right in plain sight.